Fathers hold a pivotal place in the family dynamic. Unfortunately, many people are forced to grow up without their fathers, or worse, grow up with fathers who'd literally rather be anywhere else. In years past, it was basically seen as a father's job to be stern, come off as uncaring, and basically just be a downright jerk. After all, how dare a man be seen with a smile on his face while playing with his kids? It's just unmanly. Thankfully, the world has changed a lot in the past few decades, and we all know just how much kids need their dads, sometimes even more so than their mothers. But when Kaylee McMullen's dad, Ronald, called 911 to report that his daughter had harmed herself, everyone was perplexed and worried. Think about it. A father just witnessed the unimaginable. It must have been so heartbreaking and devastating. But as Kaylee's death was investigated, more and more details came out that just weren't adding up. The awful case of Kaylee McMullen is so tragic, awful, and confusing, but it'll also leave you plagued with the most uncomfortable feelings of betrayal. Welcome to True Crime Stories. I'm your host and fellow armchair detective, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week. So if that's your kind of thing, and let's be honest, if you're watching this video, it probably is, then hit that subscribe button. It's free and just keeps you up to date with all of my future videos. Kaylee Jo McMullen was born on December 20th, 1994, to Ronald, or Ronnie, and Karen McMullen in Norman, Oklahoma. She was born and raised there, and this is also where the rest of this case takes place. Kaylee was a sweet and outgoing girl who loved cheerleading. At the age of 8, she joined the Oklahoma Twisters All-Star cheerleading team. This was the moment that Kaylee realized she had a natural talent for cheerleading, and she loved it, so much so that she cheered all throughout high school. She attended Norman North High School, and during her time as a cheerleader, Kaylee traveled all over the country, participating in several cheer competitions, including Cheerleading Worlds in Orlando, Florida. With so much experience under her belt, she was a varsity co-captain, and she led her team to win the 2013 and 2012 6A state title. According to her cheer team members, Kaylee was a bright and very cooperative team leader. She stepped up to give her best, but she was also very down to earth, and she always looked out for other girls on her team. Fast forward to 2013. Kaylee graduated high school and enrolled in Bible college in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. But after college, Kaylee returned to her hometown because she had other plans. See, Kaylee had a very helpful and healing personality. She wanted to help save lives, so after graduating college, she got her EMT certification in Norman. At the time of the case, Kaylee was working at CSL Plasma and as an EMT with Norman Regional EMS Stat. Kaylee loved this job. It was what she wanted to do all of her life, and it's safe to say that it was her dream job. By all accounts, Kaylee was a loyal and trustworthy person. She was a great daughter and a friend, and no one who knew her had a single bad thing to say about her. But the thing is, even the most lovable people can become victims of tragedy. And unfortunately for Kaylee, she was about to learn this firsthand. At the time of this case, Kaylee had moved out of her family home, but she was still living in Norman. She had a habit of visiting her family frequently, even staying a couple of nights. Kaylee and her family were super close, so this sort of thing had kind of become the norm from time to time. Kaylee had also been in a couple of relationships, but at that time in June, she was single, but had gone out on a date with a man. On June 28th, Kaylee got dressed up, and she and her date went out for the evening. Everything had seemingly gone well, and Kaylee returned to her parents' home at Abe Martin Drive in the late hours of the night. But this is when everything changed. See, in the early hours of the morning, before 6 a.m., Kaylee's dad, Ronald, made a 911 call. In the call, a disturbed Ronald told the dispatcher that his daughter, Kaylee, was not breathing, and that's because she had turned a weapon on herself. When he was instructed to perform CPR on Kaylee, Ronald stressed rather flatly that Kaylee had passed and she was not breathing and CPR would have been useless. But at the end of the call, Ronald told the 911 dispatcher that his wife Karen was administering CPR anyway. Immediately after the call, officers drove to the McMullen house, and inside, they were horrified by what they discovered. On the living room floor lay a now lifeless Kaylee with a serious wound to her face. The living room was like a scene from a nightmare, and officers noticed red stains on Ronald's shirt, and he was naturally very emotional. Karen was on the ground trying to revive her daughter with tears in her eyes, but sadly it was too late. 22-year-old Kaylee McMullen was now gone, and the investigators were left confused and with a lot of questions. Kaylee's body was immediately taken in for an autopsy, and this was where the police started to notice something weird. Ronald, whose shirt was covered in what was certainly Kaylee's blood, was trying to wash it off. The investigators constantly tried to make him stop, but he wouldn't, and at one point he had to be physically restrained to prevent him from removing any more blood off of his shirt. But the thing is, people can grieve in unusual ways, so at the time this wasn't too terribly alarming. But a weird thing that the detectives questioned was just how so much blood had gotten on Ronald in the first place. It's possible this had happened when he tried to save Kaylee after initially discovering her, but the quantity just seemed insane. When the investigators asked Ronald about this, Ronald said that he'd gone to the bathroom after greeting Kaylee when she got home. When he came out, that was when he found Kaylee fiddling with one of the firearms and asked him whether it was loaded or not. Ronald immediately leaped forward to take the weapon away from her, and that was when it went off and struck Kaylee, instantly and tragically ending her life. Now, at this point, it was never really explained why Kaylee would have had this weapon in the first place, but that was largely irrelevant at this point in the investigation. The police had to start somewhere, so they decided to check Kaylee's phone for any clues, and in the meantime, they also contacted Kaylee's date. The investigators thought that maybe something had gone wrong on the date that prompted Kaylee to consider ending her own life, but after talking to the man that Kaylee went out with, the detectives found out that everything had gone well. They talked, they had a bite to eat, and then they went home. The investigators were back to square one, and they were waiting on the autopsy results as well as Kaylee's phone and text records. When the autopsy results came back, well, they were very strange. Based on the injury and the marks on Kaylee's face, ballistic analysis showed that the round was fired from about 18 inches away. Now, this was immediately weird for the police to hear. See, if Kaylee had done this to herself, and the story that Ronald shared was accurate, then the weapon should have been more like 12 to 14 inches from her face. Now, this may sound like a fairly small difference, negligible even, but even a single inch of difference can completely change the outcome of a case. The thing is, based on the scene of the crime, combined with this newfound information, Kaylee could not have inflicted this wound upon herself. Now, there was gunpowder residue on Kaylee's fingers, but it wasn't nearly enough to confirm that Kaylee had fired the weapon. In fact, the amount of residue that was found on her hands, combined with the distance of the round, it meant that rather than attempting to harm herself with the weapon, Kaylee was likely trying to fight it off. By this point, all eyes were on one person, Kaylee's father. You might have heard about significant others, siblings, or even strangers committing murder. But a father behind his own daughter's death? That's just unbelievable. But the investigators were convinced that if anyone had a hand in Kaylee's demise, it was her father, Ronald. But how did they come to this conclusion? Well, it was because of Ronald's actions and everything else that followed after Kaylee's attack. First of all, Ronald tried to wash the blood off of his shirt to throw the police off. Even though the officers managed to restrain him and even took pictures of the stained shirt as evidence, what Ronald went on to do after the fact was even more bizarre. According to the officers at the crime scene, Ronald went outside, dug a hole in the ground, and covered himself in dirt. Afterward, Ronald refused to take a polygraph test, which only added to the police's suspicion. And if that wasn't enough, Ronald's as well as Kaylee's phone contents were checked, and they found some pretty suspicious activity. First, at the time of Kaylee's death, Ronald didn't immediately call the police. He actually called his wife and Kaylee's mom, Karen, at around 5:38 a.m. Now, this was weird for all the obvious reasons. It was alleged that Ronald called Karen to come over right away, which was why she was at the scene trying to give Kaylee CPR. But when the detectives checked messages between Ronald and Kaylee, their blood ran cold. The investigators discovered that Ronald was full-on obsessed with his daughter, but not in an overbearing parent kind of way. It seemed much worse. From the tone of Kaylee's texts, it seemed as though she was afraid of and maybe even creeped out by Ronald. Kaylee's texts read, quote, "Daddy, you made me very uncomfortable the other night when we were drinking. I don't live with you and I don't have to tell you everything I go and do. You're wearing me out with stalking and nosiness." Keep in mind that the last two texts were sent by Kaylee on June 1st, just weeks before the tragic attack. If this weren't bad enough, there were also some messages that suggested that Ronald was also attempting to take advantage of his daughter, though he claimed to have no memory of it. But that always seems to be the case in situations like this, doesn't it? The police were as baffled as they were disgusted when they found out about this. But Ronald's texts were far more infuriating. Ronald responded by saying, "I don't remember anything except your mom getting mad and pointing a weapon at me." The audacity Ronald has to deny what he was doing to his daughter, that's just beyond me. But also, when Kaylee confronted Ronald via text on June 1st, asking him to stop being so nosy, he ignored everything she said and just said that he was a fact finder. What does that even mean? Also, when the investigators checked the most recent texts between Ronald and Kaylee, they were horrified to learn that he had threatened Kaylee to come home on time after her date. Otherwise, he would, quote, track her down. But keep in mind, Kaylee was 22. She wasn't a child with a curfew, and she didn't even live with this guy. You can't tell me that this is an overprotective father speaking. This text sounds more like that from a jealous boyfriend than anything else. Moreover, even though Kaylee wasn't living with her family anymore, Ronald had been keeping tabs on her by tracking her phone without her knowing, which is just so scary and bizarre. I can't even wrap my head around what Kaylee must have been going through. And at this point, the detectives knew that Ronald was hiding something. So on July 5th, he was arrested on the charge of first-degree murder, and he was held in jail without bond. Ronald's trial was held in 2018, and the prosecution had their star witnesses, including Kaylee's friends and her ex-boyfriend, Paul Sargent. What they had to say, though, left everyone stunned. According to one of Kaylee's childhood friends, Sonia Hester, Kaylee had confided in her about Ronald being physically abusive towards her during a particularly heated argument. According to Sonia, at some point during the fight, Kaylee's mom, Karen, intervened and armed herself. Sonia testified that Karen threatened Ronald that if he ever touched Kaylee again, then he would regret it. The second witness testimony was from Paul, Kaylee's on and off again ex-boyfriend. The two were broken up, but they remained on good terms and would frequently communicate with each other. According to Paul, Kaylee called him on April 6th of 2017, and from the tone of her voice, Paul knew something was wrong. Paul corroborated the occurrence of the fight Sonia was talking about, and even about the time when Karen threatened Ronald. He explained that after the fight, Kaylee and her mother started sleeping in the same room. At first, everything was peaceful, but shortly after, Ronald came in, and that's when things got, well, I don't think I have to say it, and the YouTube police probably wouldn't let me say it even if I wanted to. But another witness, Megan Swan, who was not only Kaylee's friend but also her cheer partner, took the stand as well and testified that Ronald and Kaylee had a very close relationship, kind of like friends. Megan remembered that Ronald would drink a bit and would often push Kaylee to drink too. At that time, Kaylee would have been in high school, and she was obviously under the legal drinking age, but it didn't seem that Ronald cared. If anything, he urged Kaylee to drink, which is just unbelievable. Megan was also one of the first friends who got to know about the abuse Kaylee was suffering from. The next witness on the stand was none other than Kaylee's mom, Karen. But her testimony will leave you confused and somewhat angry. Karen denied the abuse allegations against her husband and even denied threatening him. Kaylee's friends testified in court that Karen defended her daughter, which is admirable, but now Karen was the one denying it. But why? It doesn't even make any sense. Was she afraid of retaliation or maybe being punished for the threats she'd made? I don't know, but this testimony just threw me for a loop. If Karen did defend her daughter, then that was what any mother should have done. But why was she now suddenly denying everything after a handful of people were already testifying otherwise? It's all just so confusing and unnecessarily complex. Anyway, when a prosecutor asked Karen if she would have remained married to Ronald if she knew that he killed her daughter, Karen emotionally replied in the negative. In Karen's defense, the night Kaylee was attacked was a bit of a blur for her. She doesn't remember much and everything was just hazy. She only remembers that her daughter was found on the floor, lifeless and cold. Lastly, a police officer also testified, saying that he heard Ronald say something eerie right as the officers were stepping out of the door on June 29th. According to the officer, Ronald, who was covered in dirt and blood, turned to his wife Karen and said, quote, "I did that." Anyway, according to the prosecution, this was what they believed happened. After Kaylee received that very unnerving text from Ronald about coming home on time, she made her way to her family home. And that was where Ronald confronted her, and in anger over disobeying him, he attacked her with a firearm, tragically ending her life, and then he called Karen to confess what he did. After that call, that was when he called the police. In hindsight, the 911 call seemed so eerie, especially when he seemed stressed that Kaylee was gone and not breathing. That was all his doing. The defense, on the other hand, stuck to the original story of Kaylee mishandling the firearm and that all of it was a tragic freak accident. Infuriatingly, the defense even went on to say that there was no proof of Ronald making advances towards Kaylee, so all the claims must have been fabricated by Kaylee herself for attention. Again, this is just the defense team's claim, and I'm not suggesting this is the truth whatsoever. These claims were baseless on so many levels. People can beg for attention in many ways, but this is something very serious. Kaylee wouldn't make accusations like these if there wasn't any truth in them. Well, the prosecution shut down that claim pretty quickly when they presented an affidavit. It dated back to April of 2009, and it stated that Ronald was accused of taking advantage of Kaylee, who was only 14 years old at that time, although no charges were pressed. So this added another very frightening layer to this case. Kaylee was being abused by her father for years, not months. It proves that Ronald isn't just a disgusting excuse of a person, but he's also a master manipulator, and he knows how to keep Kaylee quiet and not let her press charges. It leads you to believe that what Karen said on the stand about denying the abuse was something she did in fear of Ronald. Keep in mind that this is all an assumption, as we'll never know why Karen denied the abuse claims. But this trial was nearly over. Ronald's trial lasted about 2 weeks, and on December 4th, 2019, Ronald Lee McMullen was found guilty of the first-degree murder of his 22-year-old daughter, Kaylee, and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the verdict, Karen broke down in tears and sobbed uncontrollably. Ronald's face was stone cold and emotionless throughout the trial and the sentencing, which was so unnerving, and it shows what kind of a monster he truly is. Kaylee was a young and ambitious woman who had so much to look forward to. Having worked in emergency services herself, Kaylee was a very compassionate and patient person. But Kaylee could have never imagined that one day she'd find herself on the receiving end of the very EMT services that she provided. The reason behind her death was her father, who had a very sick and depraved fascination with her. After Kaylee's death, Karen unfortunately now suffers from PTSD. Being a nurse, she must have been used to seeing patients of all kinds, but seeing her daughter like that in their own home is a memory that has been viciously engraved into her mind. It's unclear whether Karen was a victim of Ronald's too, but knowing Ronald, I wouldn't put it above him to control everyone he had power over. Ronald's disgusting actions led to irreversible outcomes, and not only did they lead to his daughter losing her life at his hands, but he also completely destroyed the McMullen family. Whether he was losing control over Kaylee or he didn't want anyone to find out what he was doing to her behind closed doors, we don't know the reason behind his heinous actions. But what we do know is that Ronald is a sick, rotten, and deranged monster from the inside out, who left everyone scarred. He doesn't deserve to ever see the light of day again, and he won't. We can only hope that Kaylee's family and friends can move on from this tragic loss, because Kaylee could have accomplished so much in her life, but her life was cut short by the very person who helped give her life in the first place. This case is so disturbing and uncomfortable. To think that a father can commit murder is bad enough, but the disgusting reason behind it just makes your skin crawl. It's something you don't want to wish even on your greatest enemy. Fathers are protectors. They're supposed to be kind. They guide their children and nurture their young minds to become better. Kids look up to their parents, especially their fathers. It can sometimes become natural to be somewhat of an overbearing parent, but Ronald took that to a completely different place. To all the fathers watching, the best thing you can possibly do is set a good example for your children and make them proud. You're their hero whether you want to believe it or not. Don't force them to take that title away from you. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple channel members, including Susan Q and Sarah Anderson. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public, and it's currently the best way you can help support the channel. I really appreciate all of you that have decided to do that. And if you want to join, you can click that big join button below the video, or find the link down in the description. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered, and don't forget to subscribe. It's completely free and just keeps you up to date with all of my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Most of us fall in love for the first time while we're still in school or attending college. And for Alex Skeel, a 28-year-old man from Stewartby in Bedfordshire, England, this was no different. But his case is one that's left many people in disbelief when it came to light that he'd been suffering horrific abuse at the hands of Jordan Worth, the woman who claimed to love him. And it would take a near-death incident to finally bring her heinous misdeeds into the public eye for all to see. Alex Skeel didn't have an easy start to his life. He and his twin brother Luke were both born prematurely on the 17th of August, 1995. And weighing just 2 pounds, he had to spend some time in intensive care and underwent several surgical procedures while he was still an infant. He went on to make a full recovery, and later on he and his brother became models for the well-known supermarket franchise Asda. A pretty happy ending to an otherwise tumultuous situation. While growing up, Alex developed a deep love for football, or soccer as we call it in the States, and Alex spent most of his weekends playing the game with his friends. By June of 2012, Alex was 16 years old and attending Bedford College in Bedford, England. It's here that he would meet Jordan Worth, a fellow student who was studying fine arts. On the 3rd of June of that year, one of Alex's friends was performing in a play at the college, and Alex decided to attend to show his support. Jordan was also in attendance, since one of her friends was also in the play, and soon she and Alex started chatting. Now, Alex had never shown much interest in women, but something felt different when he was with Jordan, and before long, he was falling head over heels for her. He found it surprising and exhilarating that Jordan showed interest in him, and at the time, he described her as a confident, caring, and loving person. He introduced her to his friends, and they all got along, though Jordan seemed reserved and introverted compared to the rest of the group. Regardless, they accepted Jordan for who she was, and soon she was just as much a part of the group as anyone else. Alex later introduced Jordan to his family, and this is when he started to notice strange things about her behavior. Jordan would comment on the clothes that he was wearing, and on some occasions would mention that she didn't like the color, and that it didn't suit him, and that she thought he should wear something else. She would also make comments about other things like his hairstyle, suggesting that he'd rather wear it in a style that she preferred. And at first, he didn't think much of it, but changed some things that she had mentioned since he wanted to impress her. After all, every relationship is full of compromise. Though, admittedly, these were some pretty strange things to compromise on, and a lot of the time, it wasn't a compromise at all. It almost felt as though Jordan was demanding these things while offering nothing in return. Alex's parents also started noticing that Jordan was playing mind games, and they tried to warn him, but he felt that when he and Jordan were alone, things were different. And although he had also noticed some strange behavior on her part, he was sure that it was nothing to worry about. That brings us to the 17th of August, 2013. Alex and Luke were celebrating their 18th birthdays, and their mother decided to make the day special by hiring a caterer and inviting all of their friends to celebrate with them. But when Jordan got wind that a certain family friend's daughter would be attending, she proclaimed that she wouldn't be going to the party. End of story. But Alex eventually convinced her to change her mind. During the night, though, an altercation broke out between Jordan and the girl, who was just 15 at the time, with Jordan hurling some rather nasty language towards her. Jordan was generally unhappy that Alex was spending all this time with people other than her. She wanted him all for herself, and nothing else would do. Although Alex's friends tried to warn him that Jordan was nothing but trouble, he just couldn't see it. Considering how much he loved her, he allowed her antics to continue, believing it was all for the best. After this argument at the party, the couple started fighting much more frequently, and on one occasion, Jordan lost her temper and snapped Alex's phone's SIM card in half, preventing him from contacting anyone on his phone. He suddenly realized that his family and friends were right, and he decided to end the relationship, much to the relief of everyone around him. From this point forward, things seemed like they'd begun to cool down for Alex. His life gradually got back to normal, and all was well. But Jordan, she had other things in mind. Unfortunately, as is true in many abusive relationships, the separation between Alex and Jordan didn't last long. Just a few days after the breakup, Jordan arrived at the family's house with the shocking news that she was pregnant with Alex's child. He agreed to support Jordan and their child financially, but told her that they couldn't be in a relationship since he couldn't handle the mind games and her controlling behavior. For the next 12 months, they had virtually no contact, and for Alex, things couldn't have been better. Jordan gave birth to a healthy baby boy on the 19th of May, 2014. And without prior warning, Jordan showed up to the family's home with the boy so that everyone could meet him. Though Alex was unhappy with Jordan being invited into the house, his family felt that she'd changed after becoming a mother, since she showed none of the strange behavior that they'd witnessed in the past. For Alex, though, the wounds still felt too fresh, and he wanted no part in this. Instead, he decided to meet his son for the first time without Jordan present, opting instead to do so with his grandfather, who he was very close with, by his side. But before long, as you probably expected, Alex and Jordan started spending time together again while caring for their son, and the following year, they decided to officially and formally get back together. This time, everything seemed different. Jordan truly seemed to have turned over a new leaf, and by Alex's own admittance, their relationship was better than it had ever been. But just a short while later, Alex's family started noticing more alarming behavior, and when Alex confronted Jordan about it, she lost her temper yet again. She told Alex that he had to choose between her and his family. Alex didn't want to be separated from his son, and so he decided to move in with Jordan. His family wouldn't see him again for the next 2 years. The couple had moved into Jordan's parents' house, but here, Jordan's controlling behavior only escalated. She forced Alex to change his phone number, and on several occasions accused him of cheating on her with other women, even though Alex wasn't that kind of person and never showed any interest in anyone else. She also falsely told him that her mother had been informed by his family that his grandfather had passed away, but upon seeing how upset he was, she later admitted that she had lied. Why she did this? Nobody knows. Despite all of this, the couple decided to find their own place in 2016, and they moved to Stewartby. For a while, everything seemed perfect. Alex and Jordan were getting along, their son was healthy, and they loved their new house. Since the relationship seemed to be better than ever before, they decided to have another baby, and soon, Jordan was pregnant once again. While everything was going great during these days, their house of cards would soon come crashing down. And Alex could have never expected the terror and turmoil that his life was about to crash into. Jordan was still in college at this time. She had classes nearly every day. But as time passed by, she began to grow concerned that Alex may have been sneaking around behind her back while she was gone for the day. As it would turn out, she was right. But Alex wasn't sneaking around with other women, he was sneaking around to visit his family. When Jordan found out about this, she was beyond livid. From this point on, she forced Alex to attend all of her classes with her so that she would always be able to keep an eye on him. Alex hesitantly agreed because he couldn't stand the thought of shaking the foundations of his already fragile family. It wasn't long after this that Jordan had set up a fake Facebook profile in Alex's name, and in the months that followed, she contacted his friends via private messages, stating that he wanted nothing to do with them, and that he'd never really considered them as his friends in the first place. Luckily, they quickly caught on and replied that they knew Jordan was the one messaging them, resulting in him being blocked from the fake profile. She also messaged his family pretending to be Alex, telling them that he didn't want any contact with them and that they should just leave him alone. Again, it seems the family knew that these messages weren't from Alex, but from Jordan. By this time, Alex's family had had enough, and they made up their minds to intervene. They knew that the couple had relocated to Stewartby, but when they finally tracked Alex down at his new address, their knocks were ignored, despite the couple clearly being home. They were under the impression that Alex didn't want to see them, and so they had no choice but to leave. In the meantime, Jordan's behavior had gotten worse than ever before, and on one occasion, she forced Alex to swallow an entire packet of sleeping tablets, which left him with memory loss for the rest of the evening. When he finally woke up, he had no clue what had taken place, and to this day, that evening is still a bit of a blur. A few days later, the two were driving in their car when, without provocation, Jordan picked up her hairbrush and started assaulting Alex with it, resulting in one of his teeth breaking off. She would later admit to the assault, but maintained that she had never been abusive towards him before, nor had she ever kept him from contacting his family. The investigation into this incident more or less ended right there. But things would only get far, far worse from here. During the nights when Alex had fallen asleep before Jordan, he would repeatedly be awoken by blows to his head, which would leave him with scars afterward. During one of these attacks, Alex was unsure what had even happened, and to his shock, he realized that Jordan had assaulted him with a hammer. When questioned by the police later on, Jordan would admit that she had in fact used a hammer to assault him, but inexplicably stated that she never meant to hurt him. But then, investigators found out that she had taken things a step further on a couple occasions, pulling out a knife. Her response to this accusation was even more baffling. She stated that yes, she had used a knife to assault him, but she only ever cut him and never jabbed him with it, as if that would make things better. It would seem that in her mind, the two actions were vastly different. But in reality, regardless of how things specifically played out, Alex's life was in constant danger. By this time, Alex had started to lose weight in a dramatic way, since Jordan would sometimes not allow him to eat. This would usually be when she wasn't hungry, and so she didn't see the point in preparing dinner, and it would seem that she prevented Alex from preparing dinner either. She also started prohibiting him from sleeping in their bed, instead forcing Alex to sleep on the floor. She would later make the excuse that there wasn't space for Alex, since she was sharing their bed with their baby, but this was an obvious lie. Alex knew that he was in trouble by this point. There was no doubt in his mind that he was going downhill physically, but his judgment had become so clouded that he didn't know what to do. He saw no other option than to contact his family for help, and in February of 2017, he contacted his father out of desperation. But when his father arrived at the couple's house, all of the lights were suddenly switched off, and Alex asked him to leave, but he refused to do so. Instead, his father phoned the police since he suspected that Jordan was keeping him from coming outside. He didn't know how right he was. It would seem that for weeks or months leading up to this, Jordan had prevented Alex from leaving the house at any point without her accompaniment or approval. He was to remain in her line of sight at all hours of the day, no exception. When officers arrived later on, they spoke with the couple and then told Alex's father that the couple had merely had an argument and that the issue had been resolved. They did, however, mention that Alex was seen walking with a limp, but stated that there wasn't much that they could do other than to ensure that the fight was well and truly over. Disappointed by the outcome, Alex's father had no choice but to leave empty-handed. It would seem at this point, Alex was desperate to get out of the relationship, but Jordan's controlling behavior had gotten so out of control that he had no idea how to deal with it or how to escape the nightmare that he was living. He was now a prisoner within his own home. He couldn't leave. He couldn't sleep. It almost felt as though he couldn't breathe without Jordan's permission. But quite unbelievably, the worst was yet to come. Alex would later recall that he and Jordan went to see a band perform in Leeds one night, and he thoroughly enjoyed himself. Not only because it was his favorite band, but because he and Jordan were having a good time, and he felt as though he didn't need to worry about being abused for once, even if only for one night. But his relief was short-lived. The following morning, he woke up in their hotel room to the horrific realization that Jordan was pouring boiling water down his back for reasons unknown. He would later state that he'd started screaming in pain and couldn't understand why she had done this. When Jordan was confronted about this by investigators later on, she merely stated that it was untrue, since she had never poured boiling water on Alex while they were in Leeds, with her exact words being, quote, "never in Leeds, never." On another occasion, Jordan purchased a cheap lie detecting device, which she told Alex to strap to his hand. She quizzed him on things about all kinds of stuff, all the while standing ready with the kettle of boiling water, which she intended to use if he was found by the machine to have been untruthful. To make matters worse, Jordan would reveal a short while later that she'd fallen pregnant yet again. But while most of us would recoil in horror at the thought of this, Alex believed that having another baby together might bring about a change in Jordan's behavior. But as is to be expected, this simply wasn't the case. Their second child, a girl, was born in May of 2017, and for the first few days, Alex did see a change in her behavior, but this wouldn't last long. The couple had started arguing yet again, and one night, their neighbor had had enough and decided to call the police. The caller would tell the 999 dispatcher that he was certain someone was being assaulted since he heard a man asking someone to stop hurting him and to get off of him. When officers arrived at the scene, they had to knock and call out several times before the door was opened by Jordan. The first officer to see her stated that she didn't seem in any way distressed, and she calmly stated that there had been an incident in which Alex had hurt himself. She added that he had a history of self-harm, which was of course untrue. But when the officer asked Alex whether this was the case, he stated that it was, likely out of fear that he would be assaulted if he contradicted her. It would later come to light that Jordan had been assaulting Alex with a bread knife. In an effort to defend himself, he had to put his hand in front of his face to avoid being cut, and in the process sustained a serious injury to his hand. After the police left, Alex went to a local hospital where he received stitches, and since the police officers couldn't see any evidence that a crime had been committed, they took the couple's word that the injury was self-inflicted, and hence could do nothing further. The injury to Alex's hand was so severe that he needed surgery, but before this could happen, Jordan arrived and decided that he needed to go home instead. Hospital staff were quick to realize what was going on, and they tried to convince him to stay, if only to undergo the necessary procedure. Alex was then seen by a consultant who asked him if he was sure that he wanted to leave, since he felt that it would be unsafe. But Alex assured him that everything would be all right, so he left the hospital and went home with Jordan. He would later admit that in that moment, he knew he had a chance to reveal everything that had been done to him, but he was frightened at what the repercussions would be the next time that he was alone with Jordan. A few days later, the same officer who'd been called to the house before returned to the property for yet another domestic incident report. And this time, he sat Alex down to ask him whether he was being abused while he ordered Jordan to stay downstairs. But Alex stated that he and Jordan had merely been arguing since they were under a lot of stress. In body cam footage of the incident, it becomes clear that the officer doesn't believe him and decides to take Alex out of the house. He escorted Alex to his patrol car and asked him to finally tell the truth since they were in a safe environment where they couldn't be overheard. Alex stuck to his story for a short while, but eventually relented and admitted that he had been suffering abuse at Jordan's hand for years. But he pleaded with investigators to only rely on neighbors' reports, since he didn't want Jordan to find out that he'd been the one to accuse her of a crime. Officers returned to the house and informed Jordan that she was being placed under arrest for assault, and that she would be taken to the police station for questioning, where she would be allowed to tell her side of the story. The officer would later report that Jordan mistakenly thought that she would only be out of the house for an hour or so, and that she'd be allowed to leave as soon as she had, quote, cleared everything up. Alex was then taken back to the hospital, where the true horrific nature of his injuries was revealed. Due to the head trauma that he had sustained, fluid had built up on his brain, and doctors informed him that if he hadn't received treatment when he did, he likely would have lost his life in about 10 days. When interviewed later by investigators, Alex stated that he never lashed out at Jordan in self-defense, since he didn't want to hurt her. He added that he never reported the abuse since he believed it would stop one day and that the relationship would turn out to be okay. After being questioned by police and admitting to the abuse that she'd inflicted on Alex, Jordan was charged with 17 counts of grievous bodily harm and controlling or coercive behavior. She pleaded guilty to 3 of the charges, and in April of 2018, she was found guilty and handed 2 7-year sentences to be served at the same time. She also received 6 months for the controlling or coercive behavior, becoming the first woman in UK history to be convicted of that charge. After being released from the hospital, Alex moved back in with his family, who were all too happy to see him home and safe. Jordan would eventually be released in 2023 after serving just 5 years of her sentence, when it was found that she no longer posed a risk to her surrounding community. She'll never be allowed to contact Alex again, and Alex has since gone on to become a football or soccer coach, and is now an ambassador for a charity against domestic violence called the Mankind Initiative, who also sponsors his football team. Alex has vowed to do everything within his power to spread the word of Jordan's abuse, but in a positive way, hoping to inspire other victims to take any opportunity they can to get out of an awful situation, such as the one that he had to live through. He's also started hosting talks in which he informs others of the signs of domestic abuse, and he's since stated that he's learning how to cope with the trauma and the memories of the abuse against him. He's now concentrating on the life ahead of him and creating a promising future for his children. There's been no word on what happened with Jordan after her release, but considering she's now prohibited from ever speaking to Alex again, I think I can speak for everyone when I say, who even cares what happened to her? Good riddance. It's not often that cases like this have a happy ending, so let this be a lesson to all of us. You're worth a lot more than you probably give yourself credit for. We're all above being abused, talked down to, or physically assaulted. I've said it in past videos, it can never be too early to get out of a bad situation, but it can always be too late. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories, and a huge thanks to Juan from Top 5 Unknowns for helping me out with this case since, well, as you can see, I can't really use a keyboard or mouse right now. If you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case that I covered, and don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free and keeps you up to date with all of my future videos. You can also click that join button below to help support the channel and see new videos long before everyone else does. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. It's always tragic when someone with a promising career in an industry they love has that opportunity taken away from them. The case of Tammy Lynn Leppert is no exception. Tammy was a promising film star, having landed a role in an incredibly popular movie, Scarface. But Tammy's life would take an unexpected turn when she vanished without a trace. Investigators would end up following a series of bizarre and unexpected leads while searching for the missing woman. But the clues and evidence they found, well, they were strange to put it lightly. Tammy Lynn Leppert was born on the 5th of February, 1965, and from a very young age, she was destined for stardom. She had the incredible confidence needed to perform in front of an audience, as well as beauty pageant judges, without a care in the world. She'd been doing this from a very young age, but later on in life, she aspired to become a Hollywood actress. But as she stood on the edge of realizing her dreams, she suddenly disappeared without explanation. In the weeks that followed, investigators would learn of Tammy's strange behavior and anxiety before she vanished, and since her demeanor is said to have changed overnight, many people believe something happened to her that affected her so deeply that her life would never be the same again. Speaking of Tammy as a child, her mother, Linda Curtis, described her as a remarkably beautiful girl who would always wake up with a smile on her face, and who still had that same smile when she went to bed at night. It's no surprise then that Linda decided to enter Tammy into a beauty pageant while she was still young, and it soon became apparent she had a knack for it. Linda started acting as Tammy's agent, and before long, they had to keep up with an increasingly demanding schedule, as they needed to attend rehearsals for the pageants, as well as casting interviews, since Tammy also had aspirations of becoming an actress. These days, we all understand that this type of schedule with the child is, to put it mildly, unhealthy. But keep in mind, this was back in the 60s and 70s, so this information wasn't really available. With this in mind, it isn't very often that such a hectic schedule remains sustainable. And after Tammy turned 7, her parents' relationship started to fail, and they ultimately decided to get a divorce. But Linda and Tammy forged ahead. They moved out of their family home and continued chasing Tammy's dream of stardom. But mind you, Tammy was just 7 years old, so I don't know whose dream they were really chasing, Tammy's or Linda's. That's a question that's still up for debate. Being an experienced model and theater agent, Linda took on extra clients, one of whom would eventually become a part of the family. 11-year-old Wing Flanagan soon moved in with the mother and daughter duo, and in just a short while, he and Tammy became very close, with people describing the relationship as akin to being brother and sister. Wing would later describe that Tammy would always kiss him on the cheek before he left the house for the day, and at first he would feel embarrassed by the lipstick mark that it left on his cheek. But as time went by, he started to cherish the gesture, and would often leave the mark on his cheek as a badge of honor. As time went by, Tammy proved that her success as a beauty queen was no fluke, and by the time she turned 16, she'd taken part in more than 300 pageants, walking away victorious an impressive 280 times, which is no small feat. Then, in 1983, Tammy got the chance that she was looking for. She landed a role in the movie Spring Break, which was directed by Sean S. Cunningham, probably best known for directing the movie Friday the 13th, A Stranger is Watching. She played the role of a female boxer, and is also believed to have been the model for the movie's poster. Everything seemed to be moving in the right direction, and Tammy's future looked bright, to say the least. She had cemented her status as a beauty queen without any doubt, and now she'd landed a role in the movie. But then, everything changed, and to this day, no one is certain what or who caused it, but soon enough, Tammy's life would never be the same. When filming on the set of Spring Break had been completed in July of 1982, the cast and crew were invited to attend a wrap party to celebrate, and Tammy decided to attend on her own, not bringing any guests with her. It isn't known exactly what happened, but following the party, Tammy's family and friends, including Wing, stated that she seemed like a completely different person. Her demeanor had become sullen, and while she used to be talkative and bubbly, she now suddenly retreated into her own world. Her smile seemed to fade, and when Wing asked her what was wrong, she would quickly change the subject, at times appearing to be too scared to talk about whatever was bothering her. On other occasions, she would merely laugh the question off and try to make light of the situation. But those who knew her well could tell that something was very wrong, but Tammy remained tight-lipped. Her mother started noticing that she would sometimes sit or stand in front of the house's windows, staring outside as if she was watching the street as cars passed by, but she could never get Tammy to explain why. On one occasion, she'd been looking out the window when she called Wing over to look at something. She pointed to her neighbor's house across the street and asked him to tell her what he saw. He pointed out that they'd bought a new van, to which she replied, "Exactly." This confused him, and he asked her to elaborate. She stated that the van had mirrored windows that could hide anyone inside, and added that she was certain someone was watching her from inside that van. This must have been exceedingly hard for Linda to see, since she was used to seeing her daughter happy, with a smile on her face, and always ready to take on the world. Whereas now, she'd seemingly shut down and refused to let anyone in, either out of fear or because she didn't want to get them involved. This was already worrying behavior, but things were only set to get worse. Tammy soon started acting paranoid, as if someone was out to get her, and soon she started refusing to eat any food that hadn't been prepared without her being present. This made it seem as though she was worried that someone might tamper with her food or drinks. But Linda couldn't imagine who would want to harm her in such a way, since Tammy was liked by everyone who knew her. Wing stated that on one occasion, the phone in the house rang and he went to answer it. But before he could do so, Tammy made sure to tell him that if the person on the other side of the line asked for her, he was to say that she wasn't home and that he didn't know where she was. She then made a startling admission to Linda. She stated that, quote, they were trying to end her life, but she wouldn't divulge any further information. Linda did her best to figure out who they were, but was never able to get Tammy to say any more, since she was too afraid. This gave rise to further worrying behavior. Tammy would stay in her room for most of the day, and before she ate any meal that was served to her, she would get someone else to test it first, in case it had been tampered with. Since she never opened up to her mother or any of her friends, no one was certain whether she was afraid of something or someone that was real, or whether she was in the midst of a nervous breakdown and was afraid of things that were simply imaginary. Now, having a nervous breakdown is an easy assumption to make, especially when someone had never shown such behavior before, and since her claims seemed rather outlandish, much like a movie script, no one could be blamed for wondering whether she was suffering from a mental condition. After some time went by, Tammy eventually gave in and informed her mother that it all started when she attended the after party for spring break. She told her that while there, she'd seen something that she wasn't supposed to see, and as a result, someone was looking for her, and she was worried that when they found her, they would kill her. Try as she might, Linda couldn't get Tammy to tell her what she saw that night, and she was at a loss as to how to help her daughter, which must be a terribly helpless feeling as a parent. All she could do was try to be there for her when she needed her, and hopefully she would find the courage to eventually open up. There was hope on the horizon, though. In 1983, Tammy landed a role in the movie Scarface, which starred Al Pacino. If ever there was a chance for her to make an impression, this was it, and she seemed to grasp the opportunity with both hands. While filming was underway, she stayed in Miami, Florida with her lawyer, Walter Leibowitz, who was a friend of her family's. In the film, she played the part of a beautiful woman who distracts one of the main characters while he's waiting in a getaway car. It's been said that she made quite the impression on the film's set, and before long, she was being spoken about by some of the bigger actors. Tammy not only seemed happier, but she relished the chance that she'd been given, and it seemed that she might be on the road to recovery. That is, until the fourth day of filming, when things once again took a turn for the worse. One scene in the movie showed someone being shot, and to make it as realistic as possible, the shot included fake blood coming out of the wound with force. While this would be just another day on set for most actors and crew, Tammy, who was watching the scene being filmed, found it too unnerving to watch, and it had a profound effect on her. The casting director then contacted Walter, the family friend, and informed him that something was wrong with Tammy. He stated that she'd started crying uncontrollably while the scene was being acted out, and eventually she had to be removed from the set and taken to her trailer, where they tried in vain to calm her down. She seemed to be frightened beyond help and was trembling with anxiety, but still she wouldn't tell anyone what was going on. Walter then contacted Linda to tell her what had happened, and he suggested that Linda take Tammy to a doctor or a psychiatrist to figure out once and for all what was causing her so much distress. He feared that if she didn't get help, her career would be over. No one can handle such a large amount of pressure on their own for very long, and at this point, Tammy must have felt very alone, since she was too scared to tell anyone what or who was bothering her. Keep in mind that she was never the type of person to exaggerate a situation, and hence her fear must have been very real. Walter also suggested that if someone was really coming after Tammy, she and Linda should go immediately to the police to file a report, and hopefully get the help she needs. But this never happened, and Linda didn't know what to do next. Walter was of the opinion that Tammy wasn't delusional, and that her claims were very true. He added that once he heard her talking about money laundering, he thought this may have had something to do with whatever she saw that night, but he was unable to confirm his suspicions. Following her breakdown, Tammy went back home, and Linda immediately followed Walter's advice. She took her to the Brevard County Sheriff's Office, where she felt that they would give her the help she needed. But Tammy refused to divulge anything to the police, and didn't even mention that she feared for her life. Tammy may have been a lot of things throughout her life, but a rat wasn't one of them. The only solace in this situation at this point was that Tammy was home among the people she knew and loved, but this seemed to bring her very little comfort, as her behavior only continued to baffle Linda. There were times when Tammy seemed almost normal. Some days she would wake up and be as talkative and bubbly as ever, but this usually didn't last long, and soon enough she would retreat back into her own fearful world where no one else was allowed. This gave Linda and Wing hope that she was on the road to recovery and that she would eventually return to her normal self. But those hopes were soon dashed when Tammy seemed to finally snap, and she would never be the same again. In July of 1983, Wing was sitting in the living room reading a book when Tammy suddenly confronted him and accused him of looking at her. He was completely baffled and could only defend himself by saying that she was mistaken. He quickly realized something was very wrong and tried to talk to her, asking her what was going on. But this only seemed to make matters worse, as she suddenly flew into a rage, yelling at him before suddenly storming out of the house. She opened the front door and ran out onto the porch, but she suddenly found the situation all too daunting, and she changed her mind. But then, the front door of the house had blown shut behind her, and it automatically locked, leaving her trapped outside. This caused her a massive amount of anxiety, and she started frantically banging on the door with her fists while screaming hysterically for someone to let her back inside. But before anyone could move to open the door for her, she'd gotten a hold of a baseball bat and started smashing the house's windows, giving us some serious insight into her state of mind. Wing eventually managed to open the door to let her back in, but as soon as he did so, Tammy threw herself at him and knocked him to the ground. She then jumped on him and started hitting him, all the while screaming at him. She was convinced that he had locked her out of the house on purpose, when the door had actually just blown shut by the wind. Linda heard the commotion of windows breaking and yelling, and she rushed to the living room to see what was going on. She couldn't believe that she was seeing Tammy attack the man who was like a brother to her, and in an effort to calm her down, she told her over and over again that she loved her. At first, Tammy barely seemed to notice, but when Linda repeatedly told her, "It's your mother, it's me, Tammy," she seemed to snap out of it and started to calm down. This was by far the worst incident regarding Tammy's behavior, and Linda knew she needed to find help, and quickly. She decided that Tammy should undergo a psychiatric evaluation, and she took her to a psychiatric hospital in Brevard County. She was placed under observation for 72 hours, during which time tests were done to check for alcohol and drugs in her system. But these came back clear, and it was determined that she was suffering from no mental issues. Staff at the hospital had no choice but to send her back home with no resolution, which would have been very worrying for Linda, since she was concerned that Tammy would have a similar episode again, and she might not be able to get her to calm down next time. Tammy was taken home, but as soon as they arrived, she turned to her mother and stated that, quote, he was still after her, and that he would likely soon end her life. She asked that when that happens, Linda make him pay for what he did. But once again, she refused to tell her mother who this person was that was after her, and it became clear no progress had been made. Tammy's fear was as real as ever, with no end in sight. The day after she returned home, Tammy called one of her friends, Rick Adams, and asked him to pick her up. She told him that she needed to go to church to pray, since she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to, and feared that she would be tracked down and killed. Her friend would later tell investigators that while they were at the church, Tammy was praying and crying inconsolably. And once they left, she told him that she loved him and that she may need to go away for a while. He then drove her home and left, perplexed by what had happened. The following day, she contacted a different friend, Keith Roberts, and asked if he could accompany her to Cocoa Beach. Linda wasn't sure whether this was a good idea, since Tammy was still acting strangely, but she allowed her to go with him, and they left the house at around 11 a.m. But still, she felt nervous. She felt that Tammy was possibly making an effort to carry on with her life as normal, since she would usually stay in her room, or at the very least, in the house. Little did she know that as she watched her daughter walk down the driveway and get into her friend's car, she would never see her daughter again. When questioned by investigators, Keith later reported that he and Tammy were on their way to the beach when they got into an argument. She asked if she could borrow $300 from him, then got upset when he refused to drive her to Fort Lauderdale, where she wanted to meet with a friend. He tried to reason with her, but she seemed to get more upset with every passing moment, and she eventually told him to stop the car so that she could get out. They'd only driven about 5 miles at this point, and he pulled into the Glass Bank building's parking lot to let her out of the car, with this being the final time Tammy was ever seen. No one is certain what was going through Tammy's mind at this point, but it's clear that she was looking for help, as she called her aunt's nearby shop 3 times, but had forgotten that she was on vacation, so she never received the calls. She then phoned one of her other friends, but they were also unable to answer the phone, and would only realize later that Tammy had tried to contact them. What happened to Tammy after that remains a mystery. She never returned home that night, and has not been seen or heard from since. Linda filed a missing person report on the 11th of July, but Tammy was nowhere to be found. It seemed to her friends and family as though she'd simply vanished into thin air. During their investigation, the police interviewed everyone close to Tammy, including the 2 friends who'd spent time with her in the 2 days that she was last seen. No one seemed to have a motive to want to harm her, and she hadn't mentioned any plans to anyone. It wasn't known whether she was taken against her own will or if she left by choice, and if so, where she could have gone. Most worrying of all was the fact that she was still very unstable and may have been acting irrationally out of fear. Her friends told investigators that Tammy and Linda had been arguing a lot lately, mostly about the direction of her career. They added that Tammy had stated on several occasions she couldn't wait to leave home to set out on her own. But Linda refuted these claims. She stated that her relationship with her daughter was fine, taking into account the stress that she'd been under lately. She, in turn, felt that one of Tammy's friends may be responsible for her disappearance, and specifically mentioned Keith's name as someone to be looked at. She claims that Tammy had told her that Keith was likely going to end her life, and Linda felt strongly that he was the one that she was afraid of. But after he was interviewed, investigators felt he wasn't a suspect, and no arrests were made. What doesn't make sense is, if Keith was the man she was so afraid of, why would she have called him directly and asked him to pick her up and take her to the beach? This has never been explained. What is known is that Tammy was wearing a blue floral shirt with a denim skirt and flip-flops at the time of her disappearance, and she had a gray purse with her when she was last seen. But none of these items have ever been found. Witnesses later came forward to report that they'd seen Tammy on the day that she went missing, and that she wasn't wearing any shoes, but this has never been confirmed. Now, this is the part of the video where I'll usually do a deep dive into the investigation surrounding the disappearance and what police found and what evidence they followed. But I can't this time, because police never found anything. I mean, they literally found nothing. It was as if Tammy was zapped clean off the face of the earth. The investigation ended as quickly as it had begun, because there were no trails to follow, just nothing. She was dropped off by Keith in the parking lot that day. Then she just ceased to exist. Linda added that she left the house without brushing her hair that day, which was highly out of character for her. After all, the girl was a model. But her mother is certain that she didn't run away, since she'd been planning to return to Hollywood in about 3 months, and had told her mother as she walked out the door, "Bye, Mommy. I'll see you later, okay?"
Bye, Mommy.
These were the final words spoken by Tammy, and she was never seen again. Those words remained with Linda until she passed away years later in 1995, never having learned what happened to her daughter. At one point, it was suggested that Christopher Wilder, also known as the Beauty Queen Killer, who had claimed the lives of several women in the Florida area during the mid-'80s, was responsible for Tammy's disappearance. He was known to falsely offer women the chance of modeling for magazine covers before ending their lives, but no solid evidence was ever found to link him to Tammy. And he was never officially named as a suspect, since he lost his life during a shootout with police in 1984. There was another suspected serial killer at work in the area at the time, though. John Crutchley is thought to have ended the lives of as many as 30 women between 1978 and 1985. But once again, no link between Crutchley and Tammy was ever found, and it's unlikely that he had anything to do with her disappearance. Linda stated on several occasions that she believed Tammy had inadvertently stumbled across a huge money laundering operation while at the spring break after party, and that her life had been threatened by someone involved. She felt that she was then targeted by these people, and eventually either abducted or had her life ended, since she had information that could not be allowed to be brought to the police. Whether these claims are true or not, we'll likely never know. Tammy's case is one that rings of not only tragedy, but also a promising life that changed in the span of just one night. She had the support of the people around her. She was tended to by doctors and even sat across from police officers who were willing to listen. But fear is an emotion that cannot be easily contained, and we can only imagine the terror she must have been feeling to remain silent under such dire circumstances. Still to this day, Tammy has never been found, nor has a single shred of evidence that proves she's either alive or otherwise. It's almost as if the young woman never even existed. There's just nothing at all left behind. Unfortunately, whatever the case may be, Tammy's career ended just months after it had begun, a career she'd spent her entire childhood trying to create. We can all hope that Tammy made it out of this situation safely, and that she managed to start up a new life somewhere else. In fact, following Tammy's disappearance, Cocoa Beach detective Harold Lewis received 2 telephone calls from an anonymous woman, claiming that she had proof Tammy was still alive. In the first call, the woman said that Tammy would make contact when the time was right. During the second call, she said that Tammy was doing what she always wanted, going to school to become a nurse. Proof of these claims was never provided to the police, and it's largely believed that these calls were a hoax. But it really makes you wonder. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. If you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered, and don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free and keeps you up to date with all of my future videos. You can also click that join button below to support the channel and see new videos long before everyone else does. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.